It is 3:15 in the afternoon on a blistering Arizona highway, August 28th, 2022. A state trooper pulls over a truck that is hauling a 100% enclosed cargo box trailer. There are no windows. There is zero ventilation. The metal is, it is practically baking in the desert sun. So the trooper walks up to the back doors, leaning in to check the latch, and his blood just runs entirely cold because poking through the narrow wooden slats of this lightless, sweltering oven are small human fingers.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to stick around until the end of this episode to hear the unbelievable resolution to this nightmare.
You really do.
We are Mike and Abby, and welcome to Wild Crime Podcasts. We are officially done with boring, slow burn true crime. We're tearing into the most baffling cases on Earth, untangling the lies, and dropping you right in the middle of the madness.
Whether you are on a long drive, crushing a workout, or just feeling a little bored, we are here to walk you through the mystery and make your next hour incredibly thrilling.
Because honestly, the visual of those small fingers reaching out from the darkness into that blinding heat,
It's horrifying.
it permanently lodges in your memory. It just defies basic logic. It defies humanity.
Right. And to truly grasp the absolute magnitude of what was happening inside that metal box,
Yeah.
to understand the multi-state criminal enterprise that put those kids in there, we have to establish the geography that birthed this whole operation.
Yeah.
We need to go back to the border communities of Colorado City, Arizona, and Hilldale, Utah.
Okay, the Short Creek area.
Exactly. For decades, this area operated as the impenetrable fortress of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the FLDS.
Right off the bat, I just need to clarify something for anyone listening who might be confusing the mainstream Mormon church with the FLDS. Because the mainstream church abandoned polygamy way back in 1890.
Yeah, over a century ago.
Right. But the FLDS splintered off. They dug their heels into the dirt, kept the practice alive, and essentially built a wall around themselves to completely isolate their people from the modern world. And for years, the unquestioned ruler of that world was a man named Warren Jeffs.
Precisely. Warren Jeffs wasn't just a leader to them. He was viewed by his followers as the literal mouthpiece of God on earth. But in 2006, that absolute reign hits a brick wall.
Right, he goes on the run and gets caught.
Yeah, and by 2011, he is sitting in a Texas prison serving a life sentence for the sexual abuse of minors tied to his underage marriages. Now, from an outsider's perspective, taking down the dictator seemed like a massive victory.
Well, yeah, you cut off the head of the snake.
You'd think so. But sociologically, when a dictator is abruptly removed from an entirely closed system, you don't instantly get peace or liberation. You get a catastrophic power vacuum.
Hold on, I have to stop you there. Because you say there's a power vacuum, but this community was incredibly insular. Jeffs is gone, but surely, his top lieutenants or the established church hierarchy just stepped right in.
That is the logical assumption, right? But remember, Jeffs ruled through intense paranoia.
Yeah.
He had systematically excommunicated or banished literally any male who posed even a slight intellectual threat to him.
Oh, wow, so he cleared the board.
Totally cleared it. He left behind a community of people whose primary survival skill was absolute, unquestioning submission. They were quite literally programmed to obey. So when the object of their obedience vanished into the Texas prison system, the psychological programming was completely intact, the engine was still running, there was just nobody behind the wheel.
That is terrifying.
It is. And into that incredibly dangerous void steps a man named Samuel Bateman.
Okay, so who is the Samuel Bateman? Is he like some high-ranking bishop, an educated theologian who has just been waiting in the wings?
Not at all. Bateman was born around 1976. He is essentially just a rank-and-file former FLDS member. He has zero significant theological pedigree.
Really? Just a regular guy?
Yeah. But what he possesses is this hyper-opportunistic, predatory instinct. In 2019, he surveys this fractured, lost community and sees a massive vulnerability. He wants control, but he faces a major hurdle, which is that the people still revere Warren Jeffs. If Bateman stands up and says, Jeffs is a fraud, follow me, they will instantly reject him.
Okay, so how does a guy with literally zero authority stage a bloodless coup in a town built on total loyalty to someone else?
Through a highly manipulative theological loophole, Bateman starts referring to Jeffs affectionately as Uncle Warren. He praises him. But then he introduces this massive claim. He tells the community that Warren Jeffs has been translated.
Translated? What does that even mean in this context? Because, it sounds like he's talking about a language app.
Right. Well, in certain obscure theological traditions, translation means a person has been physically taken up to heaven or move to a higher spiritual plane without having to experience physical death.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So by claiming Jeff's has been translated, Bateman pulls off this tactical maneuver that is frankly disturbing in its simplicity. He doesn't have to denounce the man who built the belief system. He just bypasses him entirely.
He's gone up to heaven. I'm in charge now.
Exactly. He tells the community, Warren is on a higher plane now, and God has chosen me to be the new earthly conduit. He co-opts their existing loyalty and redirects it entirely toward himself, creating a breakaway faction known as the Samuelites.
It is a total hijacking of their faith. He essentially steals the operating system Jeff's built and installs himself as the sole administrator.
That's a good way to put it.
And he wastes absolutely zero time exploiting that new authority. The inciting incident that kicks off this entire descent into madness happens in 2019. Bateman decides it is time to solidify his prophetic status by taking a spiritual wife. And the target he zeroes in on is his own 14-year-old biological daughter.
It is a staggering escalation, and it is vital that we pause right here to do a psychological breakdown of Bateman's mental state. Because the mother of the girl, who was Bateman's only wife at the time, discovers this plan. And when we look at the specific method Bateman uses to try and coerce his daughter, it shatters any illusion that we are dealing with a sophisticated operator.
I am so glad we're digging into this because the method he uses is completely devoid of any rational logic. He attempts to bribe this 14-year-old girl into an incestuous spiritual marriage using a $50 bill and 2 bags of Doritos.
Yeah.
It is just, I can barely process the absurdity of it. It's like a predator trying to purchase a human soul with pocket change from a gas station. It's sickeningly transactional. It's deliberately pathetic.
It really is. And it's a critical insight into his pathology. Because some people try to frame cult leaders as these dark geniuses. We cannot do that here.
No, absolutely not.
Bateman is not a genius. He is a deeply disordered, narcissistic sociopath. The Doritos bribe is incredibly revealing. It demonstrates a complete, fundamental inability to distinguish between trivial, everyday junk food and the catastrophic, life-altering violation of his own child's human rights.
It just shows his baseline assumption of what people are worth.
Exactly. He operates on this delusional entitlement. Because he has convinced himself that he literally speaks for God, every base predatory impulse that crosses his mind is automatically justified. In his worldview, his desires are divine mandates. He doesn't think he needs an elaborate grooming process because he believes he is entitled to total compliance.
Thankfully, the mother doesn't buy into the delusion. She grabs her daughter, they immediately move out, and she files for a restraining order against Bateman.
Right.
And in those documents, she details exactly what he tried to do. She spells it out. The system has the warning. The red flag is not just flying. It is practically hitting the authorities in the face. Yet, local law enforcement completely fails to see this as the beginning of a broader trafficking operation. They treat it like a localized, messy domestic dispute.
Which is a catastrophic institutional failure. In insular communities like this, law enforcement often lacks the specialized training or the operational distance required to identify coercive control and religious extremism.
Yeah, they just brush it off.
Exactly. That restraining order was the canary in the coal mine. By failing to launch a comprehensive investigation into a man claiming divine authority to marry his own child, the authorities inadvertently signaled to Bateman that he was operating in a blind spot. They left him completely unobstructed to build his empire.
That restraining order should have been the end of it. But Bateman's twisted theology was about to cross 4 state lines, dragging dozens of victims into a digital nightmare.
Between 2020 and 2021, the Samuelite faction undergoes a terrifying expansion. Bateman's influence metastasizes, and he amasses a core group of about 50 devoted followers. And the demographic of the wives he begins collecting is where the true horror of this operation really solidifies. He claims over 20 women as his spiritual brides.
And at least 10 of them are underage minors.
Yes, with victims as young as 9 years old.
9 years old, it makes you physically sick. And the logistical footprint of his crimes starts to grow, too. He's not just keeping this isolated to a single compound in the desert anymore. He establishes a highly mobile trafficking network stretching across Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and Nebraska.
Right.
We are talking about moving human beings across state borders to evade detection. He even orchestrates international travel, crossing into Mexico and Canada under the guise of holding religious conferences to spread his influence.
Despite this mobility, though, the physical epicenter of his control remains entrenched in Colorado City. He establishes 2 primary properties that become known as the Greenhouse and the Blue House. Inside these structures, the reality is incredibly claustrophobic and grim. As many as 24 followers are crammed together in communal living situations. And a key, highly visible element of their daily existence is the mandatory uniform. The girls and women are required to wear traditional FLDS prairie dresses.
Let's talk about the specific function of those dresses because it is incredibly sinister. They aren't just clothes, they are institutional camouflage.
Oh, absolutely.
If you are a local marshal or a state social worker driving past those houses and you see women in prairie dresses doing chores, your brain categorizes it as normal for that specific area. It just looks like the same religious community that has occupied that land for decades. The aesthetic completely masks the reality. They are using the visual language of religious freedom to create a literal shield against child welfare checks.
It is a visual manipulation tactic. Because when the FBI eventually breached those properties, the contrast between the external religious facade and the internal reality was just jarring. Investigators found adult toys scattered openly in bedrooms that were occupied by children. The prairie dress was simply a uniform designed to pacify the outside world while a child abuse factory operated within.
The scale of the manipulation is wild, but the methods he used to keep the adult men in line are what really baffle me, because you have all these adult males living in the compound. How does one guy keep a dozen other men completely subservient while he's systematically taking their daughters?
That brings us to the psychological core of Bateman's control structure, the Atonement ceremonies. This is where we see the absolute destruction of male autonomy within the group. Bateman would coerce these adult male followers into large communal gatherings. He would force them to stand in front of the entire group and publicly confess their supposed sins and spiritual indiscretions.
So he induces this massive public shame. He strips away their dignity in front of their peers.
Yes, it is a classic tenet of coercive, control-induced debility and degradation. Once he has weaponized their guilt and broken them down emotionally, he introduces the penalty. He demands that these men surrender their own wives and their own underage daughters directly to him as atonement. He frames this absolute violation as their necessary godly duty to cleanse their souls.
It is pure psychological warfare. He is demanding their families as payment for fabricated sins.
But he takes it a step further into a realm of extreme trauma. He doesn't just take the families away. He forces these fathers and husbands to physically remain in the room. He forces them to watch him sexually abuse their daughters and wives.
I just cannot fathom the level of psychological decimation required for a father to stand in a room and allow that to happen. If you're watching on YouTube right now, drop a comment. How does an entire community watch a man demand their daughters for atonement and not immediately call the cops? Tell me what overrides a parent's evolutionary instinct to violently protect their child in that moment. Is it just pure paralyzing fear of this guy? Or is the indoctrination so deep that they genuinely believe their child's suffering is a necessary sacrifice for salvation? Because to an outsider, it just looks like sheer cowardice.
It looks like cowardice, but mechanically it is the result of systematic identity destruction. These men have been totally isolated from the outside world. Bateman has monopolized their perception. If they attack him, they don't just go to jail. In their minds, they suffer eternal, fiery damnation, and they lose the only community they have ever known.
Right, the stakes are eternal to them.
Exactly. Bateman engineered these ceremonies as the ultimate assertion of dominance. By forcing a father to watch, Bateman is proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the father possesses nothing. The father's property, his dignity, his very flesh and blood, all belong entirely to Bateman. It is the complete breaking of the human spine.
It is archaic, patriarchal brutality. But what makes this case so bizarre is the technology involved. You picture these fundamentalist cults as operating by candlelight, completely detached from the modern world. But Bateman was running his operation through a smartphone.
That is the jarring paradox of this case. You have ancient barbaric abuse methods colliding directly with modern, military-grade digital encryption. Bateman was heavily utilizing the encrypted messaging app Signal. He wasn't just preaching, he was coordinating the complex logistical movement of minors across multiple state lines. He was running a digitized trafficking syndicate.
And the way he used that technology to maintain control over his followers when he wasn't physically present is terrifying. You mentioned the incident in November of 2020.
Yes. From a hotel room in Colorado Springs, Bateman actively live-streamed his sexual abuse of a minor. He broadcasted this assault directly to the smartphones of his followers back in Arizona.
It is like he constructed a psychological terrarium. By broadcasting the abuse over an encrypted app, he wasn't just sharing a video, he was shrinking their world. He was sending a message that he is omniscient. He is inside their pockets. He is watching them 24 hours a day, and there is no physical distance that can separate them from his control. It is a closed-loop broadcast of pure, suffocating trauma.
And while he is executing this highly calculated digital predation, he is simultaneously harboring these utterly baffling delusions of grandeur. He truly believed his own mythology. He would spend hours preening and posing on his motorcycle, demanding his followers film him, completely convinced of his own unmatched physical and spiritual magnificence.
Okay, we absolutely have to talk about his plan involving the British monarchy, because this is where the sociopathy crosses a line into complete theatrical absurdity. This man, sitting in a dusty compound in the Arizona desert, hatches a genuine, serious scheme to lure the Queen of England into his cult.
It is almost comical if it weren't so indicative of his extreme pathology. He sincerely believed that if he produced the right kind of media, the Queen of England would view it, instantly recognize his divine prophetic status, abandon Buckingham Palace, and travel to Colorado City to become one of his spiritual wives.
I just can't.
He literally forced his followers to direct and shoot a music video specifically tailored for her.
He honestly believed the Queen of England was going to watch a YouTube video, pack her bags, and move into the Blue House.
Right.
The absolute staggering arrogance of that thought process is wild.
Delusional.
But as we were about to see, that exact narcissism, his desperate need to be seen and validated, is the exact flaw that brings his entire operation crashing down. Bateman thought his encrypted apps made him untouchable, but he was about to invite the very people who would destroy him right into his inner circle.
In 2021, the trajectory of this entire operation hits a massive turning point, and it comes in the form of two undercover filmmakers, Christine Marie and her videographer husband, Tolga Kaitas.
I am fascinated by Christine Marie. If you tried to write her character into a movie, people would say it was too unrealistic. She is a former Miss Michigan. She has a background as an escape artist and a ventriloquist.
Yeah, quite the resume.
Right. But most importantly for this scenario, she is an ex-Mormon. She runs an organization called Voices for Dignity, which specifically works to aid marginalized populations and survivors of public shaming and religious abuse. She understands the theological language, she understands the culture of isolation, and she is fiercely dedicated to dragging these abuses into the light.
Her background makes her the perfect operative for this environment. Marie and Kaitas decide to embed themselves directly into the Short Creek community. They adopt a highly specific cover story. They present themselves as sympathetic, independent documentarians. They tell the community that they want to shoot a film that will flatter the FLDS, counter the negative media narratives, and specifically highlight Bateman's rising cause.
It is a masterclass in social engineering. They don't try to sneak in through the back door. They walk right up to the front gate and hand Bateman a mirror. And because Bateman's fatal flaw is his all-consuming narcissism, he is the easiest mark on the planet. He absolutely loves the camera. He thinks these filmmakers have arrived to properly immortalize his prophetic glory. He literally invites the Trojan horse straight into his living room.
The discipline required from Marie and Kaitas is remarkable. They spend months meticulously building trust. They endure the environment, carefully documenting the daily life of the Samuelites. They establish rapport with the young, heavily manipulated wives, observing the power dynamics without blowing their cover. And eventually, their patience pays off in a way the FBI could only dream of.
The scene where they finally get the evidence is so tense. I just picture the sheer adrenaline spiking in Marie's chest. She is riding in a vehicle with Bateman and 3 of his female followers. They are just cruising down the road. And Bateman, completely unprompted, with no pressure applied, just starts casually monologuing about his crimes.
He is entirely relaxed. He openly discusses the mechanics of the ritualistic sexual abuse. He brags about the atonement ceremonies and how he breaks the men. And most damning of all, he's actively audibly coaching the minors sitting right there in the back seat on exactly how to lie to outsiders, social workers, and law enforcement.
And Marie is sitting right next to him, covertly recording the entire unfiltered confession on her phone. She is capturing pure, unadulterated prosecutorial gold. The leader of a child sex trafficking ring is outlining his entire operation on tape.
Incredible.
Wait, I have to point out the glaring contradiction here. You mentioned earlier that he is using military-grade encrypted messaging apps like Signal. He orders mass deletions. He is paranoid about digital footprints. So why in the world does he freely confess everything to a complete stranger holding a camera just because she flatters his ego? It is a staggering lack of tactical intelligence.
It perfectly illustrates the difference between tactical cunning and holistic intelligence. Bateman possesses a low-level predatory cunning. He understands how to use an app to hide a text message, but his holistic intelligence is entirely compromised by his ego. His need for validation and his desire to boast about his absolute power over these people completely override his operational security. He feels invincible, so he talks. Marie takes this explosive, undeniable audio directly to the authorities, officially becoming a critical informant for the FBI.
Marie handed them the smoking gun. She had the confession on tape. You would think the SWAT teams would be kicking down the doors that very night. It should have been game over. Instead, the legal system was about to hand Bateman a get-out-of-jail-free card in the most infuriating way imaginable.
Because the gears of federal investigations turn incredibly slowly, even with audio evidence. Which brings us all the way to that blistering afternoon on August 28, 2022, in Flagstaff, Arizona, the traffic stop we started this show with.
Let's break down exactly what the troopers found when they opened those doors, because it is horrific. This is not a ventilated camper or an RV. This is a heavy-duty, 100% enclosed cargo box trailer designed for hauling equipment, not breathing humans.
Right.
The troopers cut the lock and open it up. Inside, the heat is suffocating. They find a makeshift, unsanitary toilet, a discarded couch, and some folding camping chairs. And trapped inside this dark, roasting metal box in the middle of a desert highway are 3 young girls, ranging in age from 11 to 14.
The physical conditions inside that trailer are objectively, immediately life-threatening. The temperature inside a metal box in Arizona in August can reach lethal levels in minutes. When the police extract the girls, they try to assess their medical condition, and this is where the sheer depth of the psychological abuse becomes chillingly apparent. The girls are questioned about their physical state. They're sweating, trapped in an oven, yet they look the officers in the eye and insist they have no health or medical needs.
How does a child who is actively baking in a trailer defend the man who locked her in there?
It is the ultimate manifestation of trauma bonding. And we need to clarify what trauma bonding actually is, because it is not just a buzzword for Stockholm Syndrome. It operates on the exact same neurological mechanism as a slot machine intermittent reinforcement.
Oh, wow.
Bateman creates an environment of sheer, unpredictable terror. But occasionally, randomly, he provides a small moment of praise or validation or a twisted form of divine affection. The victim's brain becomes addicted to those rare hits of relief. The girls have been conditioned to believe that Bateman is their only source of survival. They are terrified that if they admit they are suffering, they will anger him, and the punishment will be worse than the heat. So they lie to protect him.
The psychological hold is absolute. But the physical execution of this transport brings up a massive question. I call it the fingers in the slat paradox. We established that Bateman considers himself a survivalist. He is paranoid enough to use encrypted networks. So why, when he is transporting 3 kidnapped children, does he do it in broad daylight, on a highly trafficked public interstate, in a trailer with physical gaps in the wooden slats? Gaps big enough for a state trooper to literally see the victim's fingers. It makes no logistical sense.
Investigative profilers have debated this specific detail extensively because it directly contradicts his usual paranoia. The leading theory circles back to the concept of prophetic arrogance.
Explain how that works in this context.
He has spent years surrounded by people who tell him he is God's conduit. Over time, the lie becomes his reality. He literally believes that because he is doing the Lord's work by transporting his spiritual wives, the divine spirit will physically cloak his actions.
He thinks he has an invisibility cloak.
He thinks he possesses a supernatural invisibility shield. In his mind, he doesn't need to fix the flats on the trailer because God will blind the eyes of the state troopers. His religious delusions completely erode his grasp on basic physical reality.
Well, reality clearly caught up with him because the troopers saw the fingers and they saw through the delusion. They arrest him on the spot. They hit him with state charges of child endangerment. They process him. He is in custody. And then the absolute unthinkable happens. The state authorities grant him bond. They open the doors and let him walk free.
It is an incomprehensible failure of the judicial process.
I am losing my mind over this. If you're watching on YouTube right now, drop a comment. What goes through a judge's mind when they let a guy caught with kids in a lightless box trailer just walk out on bond? What is the standard for granting bail? You are supposed to evaluate if the suspect is a flight risk or a danger to the community. You have a man caught red-handed transporting minors in a life-threatening box trailer. He has known aliases. How does any judge look at that fact pattern and determine he is safe to release back into the public? It is a catastrophic miscalculation.
It highlights a severe disconnect between local state charges and the broader unseen federal picture. The local judge likely treated it as an isolated incident of reckless endangerment rather than viewing it as a single node in a massive multi-state trafficking and cult operation. They simply did not have or did not synthesize the necessary intelligence. And that failure had immediate, devastating consequences, because Bateman is granted roughly 2 weeks of total freedom before the federal authorities finally step in and drop the hammer. And he uses every single second of those 2 weeks to orchestrate a massive, desperate cover-up.
He immediately runs back to his followers and activates a scorched earth protocol. He orders everyone to initiate a mass deletion of all their signal communications. He is frantically trying to digitally wipe the existence of his entire multi-state network. But he doesn't stop at the phones. He demands that all of his wives urgently obtain international passports. He is actively planning a mass cross-border exodus to flee the jurisdiction, likely targeting Mexico or Canada.
The window was closing rapidly. Finally, on September 13, 2022, the federal agencies mobilize. The FBI executes massive coordinated raids on the Green House and the Blue House in Colorado City. The agents breach the properties and immediately begin seizing the physical evidence of the empire. They confiscate hard drives, computer towers, dozens of cell phones, and stacks of birth certificates used for tracking the victims.
They finally busted open.
And, as we noted earlier, they uncover the stark reality behind the facade, finding the adult toys hidden in the children's rooms among the Prairie dresses. Bateman is taken into federal custody and immediately hit with severe federal obstruction charges for his frantic attempts to destroy the digital records of his crimes.
Bateman was finally behind bars. The raids were successful. But his control over his victims was so toxic, he was about to pull off a multi-state kidnapping without ever leaving his jail cell.
Following the September raid, the authorities begin the difficult process of extracting the victims. 9 of the minor girls are officially removed from the compounds and placed into the custody of the Arizona Department of Child Safety, the DCS.
Now, common sense dictates that once these girls are in state custody, the nightmare is over. They are safe. But the DCS makes an administrative blunder that is so catastrophic, so fundamentally flawed, it almost defies belief. They take these 9 girls who are deeply traumatized, heavily indoctrinated, and who have been conditioned for years to view each other as sister wives in a strict hierarchy, and they place them together in the exact same state-run group homes.
It is a profound failure to understand the sociological dynamics of high-control groups. The state viewed them merely as siblings or victims from the same case. They failed to recognize that by keeping the girls clustered together, they inadvertently allowed the internal power structure of the Samuelites to remain completely uninterrupted.
It's like rescuing people from a sinking ship, but then putting them in a lifeboat with the exact same chain of command that sank the ship in the first place.
Precisely. Inside the group homes, the older girls who were more heavily indoctrinated and held higher status as senior wives continued to exert intense coercive pressure over the younger, more vulnerable girls. They enforced Bateman's rules, monitored behavior, and actively prevented the younger victims from deprogramming or cooperating with the FBI investigators.
And it wasn't just internal pressure. The FBI later uncovers that these girls, while supposedly secure in state custody, were secretly communicating with Bateman's adult wives on the outside using hidden, encrypted group chats. The state had secured their bodies, but Bateman still entirely possessed their minds, which leads directly to the chaotic night of November 27, 2022. It is the Sunday immediately following Thanksgiving, and 8 of these children simply walk out the front door of the state-supervised facilities and vanish into the night.
There's a total, inexplicable blackout of physical security. 8 highly vulnerable witnesses in a major federal human trafficking case are able to walk away without a single alarm being triggered in time to intercept them.
And the most infuriating part, the guy actively directing this mass abduction isn't hiding in an alleyway somewhere. It is Samuel Bateman, and he's doing it from inside a cell at the Florence Correctional Complex. I need to vent for a second because this drives me insane. We live in a society where cameras can read your license plate from space. Our phones track our every footstep. Yet 8 children can effortlessly walk out of a state facility, and a high-risk federal inmate is able to order a cross-country kidnapping on a provided jailhouse tablet. How is that physically possible?
It comes down to exploiting the mundane realities of the penal system. Bateman didn't hack a mainframe. He used the standard, recorded video call system available to inmates. The logistics are chillingly brazen. He used the tablet to coordinate the escape in real time, holding video conferences with his adult wives on the outside. To evade the automated keyword monitoring systems that scan jailhouse calls, he utilized rudimentary code names, referring to the children as E1 and E2. He was actively mapping routes, issuing orders, and directing his accomplices on exactly where to position the getaway vehicles.
And the accomplices driving those vehicles were three of his adult wives who had evaded custody: Naomi Nams Bisline, Donna Barlow, and Moretta Rose Johnson. And it is crucial to remember the tragic context here. Moretta was only 17 years old herself when Bateman first claimed her as a wife. Now, a few years later, she is behind the wheel of a getaway car, actively participating in a federal kidnapping conspiracy to traffic other children. It just shows how the abuser molded into abusers.
The operation is initially successful. The group manages to evade local law enforcement and caravan all the way from Arizona, crossing multiple states, until they reach Spokane, Washington. A massive multi-agency manhunt is underway. They have managed to bypass highway patrols and slip through the cracks. And yet, the only reason this complex escape finally comes to an end is because of a remarkably sloppy, completely avoidable mistake.
This is the irony of criminals who think they are untouchable. After all the military-grade encrypted apps, the hidden group chats, and the coded jailhouse video calls, they get busted because they use a cousin's credit card to rent an Airbnb in Spokane.
The financial footprint is undeniable. In the modern era, a credit card swipe is a flare gun. The transaction immediately pings in the system, tipping off the FBI to their exact location. The local sheriff's deputies move in and pull the caravan over just as they are leaving the rental property. When they search the vehicles, they find all 8 missing girls packed inside.
The girls were safe, and the trial was set. But nothing could prepare the courtroom for the sickening betrayal that happened on sentencing day.
We jump forward to 2024. The federal government has constructed an ironclad, inescapable case against Bateman. They have the massive troves of digital evidence seized in the raids. They have the testimonies of the recovered minors. They have the financial records. And crucially, they have the undeniable undercover audio recordings captured by Christine Marie.
Right. They have him boxed in.
The walls completely close in. In April, Bateman surveys the evidence, realizes his prophetic delusions will not save him in a federal court, and pleads guilty to conspiracy to commit transportation of a minor and conspiracy to commit kidnapping.
The long-awaited sentencing hearing takes place on December 9th, 2024. Judge Susan Brnovich is presiding, and the atmosphere inside that room is described as incredibly heavy, thick with years of unprocessed trauma. 3 of the teenage survivors girls who have spent the last 2 grueling years trying to deprogram, heal in foster care, and reclaim their minds take the stand to deliver their victim impact statements.
It is an emotionally crushing scene. These girls are weeping as they testify. He described the agonizing struggle to assimilate into normal society, to just try and be normal teenagers attending high school after being raised in a nightmare. One of the survivors, who was targeted by Bateman when she was only 9 years old, stands up and plainly states that her innocence was entirely stolen.
It breaks your heart.
But amidst the tears, there is a profound display of resilience. They look directly at Bateman and tell him that his reign is over, that he no longer holds any power over their minds.
And the visual of how they are supported in that courtroom is so striking. They are escorted to the stand by a group called Bikers Against Child Abuse, or BAC. These are burly, leather-clad volunteers who form a literal physical wall of protection around the girls. It is a powerful image, but it is also a stark, depressing reminder that a volunteer group of civilian bikers had to step in and provide the physical and emotional security that the state of Arizona completely failed to offer when these girls were under their protection.
The presence of BACA highlights the vulnerability of the victims. But the true shock of that sentencing hearing didn't come from the podium. It came from the gallery.
This is the detail that absolutely shattered my brain. I cannot stop thinking about this. The judge hands down a 50-year sentence. Given that Bateman is 48 years old, it is effectively a life sentence. He's going to die in a concrete cage. And yet, if you look into the gallery of the courtroom, there is no mob of angry citizens. There are no loud, protesting supporters of Bateman, except for one specific, isolated group of people.
The biological parents of the victims.
The parents are sitting right there in the gallery. And they are not looking at the stand. They are not there to support their own weeping daughters who are bravely giving testimony about their stolen childhoods. They are there supporting the monster who abused them. They sit there completely ignoring their own flesh and blood, directing their sympathy toward Bateman.
We have to do a second deep psychological breakdown here because this specific moment goes to the absolute core of what makes high-control cults so fundamentally dangerous to the human experience. We are observing the ultimate manifestation of the parental betrayal.
It is incomprehensible to anyone outside that room. How does a mother or a father sit in a sterile federal courtroom and actively pray for the man who destroyed their child's life?
It requires an absolute systemic rewiring of the human brain. The indoctrination within the Samuelite sect was so profound, so deeply ingrained over years of isolation and fear, that it fundamentally overwrote the most basic evolutionary biological drive we have as a species, the innate drive to protect our offspring from predators.
But wait, I have to push back here. We cannot let those parents off the hook by simply labeling them brainwashed and throwing our hands up. Brainwashing sounds passive, like it was done to them while they were asleep. We have to pick apart their active logic. They didn't just lose their children, they actively traded them. They traded their daughters out of weakness. They did it out of cowardice. They had this desperate, parasitic need for spiritual validation from Bateman, a need to feel elite and saved, and they were entirely willing to purchase that validation using the bodies of their own children. They utterly, actively failed their most basic human duties.
That is a crucial distinction. Indoctrination provides the framework, but individual cowardice fuels the action. They prioritize their own perceived, selfish salvation over the physical safety and bodily autonomy of their children. The legal system did, thankfully, recognize that complicity and hold the enablers accountable to a certain degree. 7 of Bateman's adult wives, including the primary kidnappers, Noms Bisline, Donald Barlow, and Moretta Rose Johnson, were convicted for their roles in the enterprise.
They received various sentences ranging from house arrest to supervised probation. And during their court appearances, they openly admitted that they were heavily manipulated by Bateman. They acknowledged on the record that they stood by and watched the abuse happen and did absolutely nothing to stop it. Or worse, they actively participated in the logistical cover-ups.
If you're watching on YouTube right now, drop a comment. I want you to really think about the lifelong psychological burden these victims are carrying. Ask yourself, could you ever forgive your own parents if they sat in court and prayed for the monster who destroyed your childhood? How do you ever rebuild a concept of trust when the two people biologically programmed to protect you were the ones who handed you to the wolf? It is a level of complex trauma that those girls will have to navigate for the rest of their lives.
So Samuel Bateman gets 50 years. The gavel comes down. He is locked away in a federal cell where he belongs. The physical monster is removed from the equation. The surviving girls are placed with foster families, trying to get their driver's licenses, trying to catch up on years of missed education, just trying to figure out how to live a normal Tuesday. But as we look at the totality of this case, I can't shake this persistent, deeply unsettling feeling that this story isn't actually over.
And that is the chilling systemic reality we have to leave the listener with today. Samuel Bateman will absolutely die in federal prison. His specific reign of terror is finished. But the vast psychological infrastructure that he utilized, the isolated environment that allowed him to rise and thrive completely undetected, that is still 100% intact.
He didn't build the machine, he just turned the key.
Exactly. The insular community that facilitated his rise, the culture of absolute patriarchal submission, the parents who willingly handed over their children without a second thought, they haven't vanished. They haven't had a mass awakening. They have simply retreated back into the deep, quiet shadows of the Arizona desert. The physical predator have been removed from the board, yes. But the invisible factory that built him, the foundational belief system that prioritizes absolute, unquestioning obedience over human safety and dignity, remains entirely untouched. It is just waiting quietly in the heat for the next man to stand up and claim he is a translated prophet.
All right, if we made your drive, your workout, or your downtime even a little bit better today, do us a massive favor. Whether you are watching on YouTube, streaming on Spotify, listening on Apple Podcasts, or literally anywhere else, hit that follow or subscribe button right now. We drop episodes like this frequently, bringing you the most fascinating cases in the most interesting way possible. Lock in, because you do not want to miss the crazy mysteries we have queued up for next time. See you then.